Hi babes, welcome back to my channel. Now before we get into today's story, I want to clarify something. Stories I post like this are fictional. They are not real. They are my stories. I wrote them myself. I could see in my last video that some of you were confused, so I just want to put this out there. The stories are not real. They are my own stories. Anytime I post a follower story, I will let you know. Today's story is one of the most twisted revenge stories ever. Are you ready? Now, before we get into the story, if you've not subscribed to this channel yet, please subscribe and like this video. And don't forget to turn on the notifications so that when I post, you'll be notified immediately. Also, if you can watch this video to the end, I will be very grateful. And it's going to make YouTube show my videos to more people. So please watch it to the end. Today's shout out goes to Abigail8054 for being the first person to comment on my last video. Thank you so much for the support, babe. I love you. And now relax, get comfortable, and let's get right into it. Wendy was the kind of wife people admired. She was gentle, soft-spoken, and always seemed to know the right thing to say. People often whispered about how lucky Kwame, her husband, was to have her. She never raised her voice, never argued in public, and always carried herself with grace. Kwame, a businessman struggling to keep his shop afloat, had always believed he had married the perfect woman. Wendy took care of their small home with quiet efficiency, making sure everything was in order. Their house was modest but well kept, a small two-bedroom home. But beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect marriage, something was wrong. One evening, Kwame came home late, his shirt wrinkled, his face tense. Wendy was waiting for him at the dining table, a warm meal set before him. He hesitated before sitting down, his hands trembling slightly. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Wendy looked up, her dark eyes calm and unreadable. "Go on," she said, her tone gentle. Kwame swallowed hard. "I've been seeing someone else." Silence filled the room. Wendy didn't react the way he expected. No anger, no tears, no shouting. She simply tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words carefully. "How long?" she asked, her voice steady. Kwame blinked. "A few months." Wendy nodded slowly, as if she had already known. She reached for a spoon and stirred a stew, her movement smooth and controlled. "I see," she murmured. Kwame felt his stomach twist. He had prepared himself for a fight, for accusations, for heartbreak. But Wendy's eerie calmness unsettled him. "You are not angry?" he asked hesitantly. Wendy smiled, a small, unreadable smile. "No," she said. "I understand." Kwame exhaled, relieved but confused. He had expected chaos, but instead, Wendy was forgiving him so easily. It didn't make sense. Across the room, his sister Faith watched the exchange carefully. She had found out about Kwame's affair a few weeks ago and had advised Kwame to break things off with the other woman and come clean to Wendy. She had come over to visit her brother, but now she sat frozen in her chair, observing Wendy's reaction. Faith had never fully trusted Wendy. There was something about her, something she couldn't quite put into words. Wendy was always polite, always smiling, but there was a coldness beneath her kindness, like a mask she never took off. And now, as she watched Wendy accept Kwame's betrayal without a single tear, Faith felt a chill run down her spine. Something wasn't right. Something about Wendy felt off, and Faith was determined to find out why. Sandra was a beautiful woman with a lively spirit. She had a way of making people feel special, and Kwame had fallen for her charm. She worked at a small boutique, selling expensive dresses and perfumes to wealthy customers. But one day, Sandra was gone. She didn't show up for work. She didn't answer her phone. Her friends hadn't seen her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. At first, people thought she had traveled or taking time off. But as the days passed, worry grew. Her family reported her missing, and soon the police got involved. Kwame was the first person they questioned. He sat in the small police station, sweat forming on his forehead. The police across him had sharp eyes, watching his every move. When was the last time you saw Sandra? The officer asked. Kwame cleared his throat. A few days ago, he said. Did she seem upset? Did she mention going anywhere? Kwame shook his head. No, she was fine. The officer leaned forward. Mr. Kwame, you were having an affair with her, and now she's missing. Do you understand why this looks bad? Kwame swallowed hard. I had nothing to do with her disappearance, he said firmly. The officer didn't look convinced. Meanwhile, Wendy played the role of the perfect wife. She stood by Kwame, holding his hand, comforting him. She told the police she had no idea her husband was cheating. She acted shocked, hurt, betrayed. I never knew, she said softly, her voice trembling. I thought we were happy. He just told me. The officers believed her, but Faith didn't. She watched Wendy closely, studying her face, her movements. Wendy's words sounded right, but her eyes told a different story. They were cold, calculating, hiding something. Faith felt a deep unease settle in her chest. Sandra was gone, and somehow she knew Wendy had something to do with it. Faith couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with Wendy. Ever since Sandra disappeared, Wendy had been acting too perfect, too supportive, too calm. It didn't feel real. It felt planned. Faith decided to watch her closely. She noticed how Wendy never seemed nervous, even when Kwame was being questioned by the police. She noticed how Wendy always smiled at the right moments, always said the right things. But most of all, she noticed how Wendy never let anyone touch her things. One afternoon, when Wendy was out running errands, Faith saw an opportunity. She tiptoed into Wendy's bedroom, her heart pounding. The room was neat, almost too neat. The bed was perfectly made, the curtains drawn. The air smelled of lavender, a scent Wendy always used. Faith moved quickly, knowing she didn't have much time. She opened the closet, scanning the shelves. Clothes were folded neatly, shoes lined up in perfect rows. Nothing seemed out of place. Then she spotted Wendy's purse sitting on the dresser. Faith hesitated for a moment, then reached for it. She unzipped the bag carefully, her fingers trembling. Inside, she found the usual things: lipstick, a small mirror, a pack of gum. But then, tucked deep inside, she felt something strange. A small cloth bag. She pulled it out, her breath catching in her throat. It was heavier than expected. Slowly, she untied the knots and peeked inside. Her stomach twisted. Teeth. Human teeth. Some were small, some were large, some looked old, yellowed with time. Others were fresh, clean, almost new. Faith's hands shook as she stared at them. Why would Wendy have something like this? Her mind raced, and she felt sick. Then footsteps. Faith's heart stopped. Wendy was coming. She shoved the bag back into the purse and zipped it up, her fingers fumbling. She turned just as Wendy stepped into the room. Wendy paused, her eyes narrowing. What are you doing in here? She asked, her voice calm but sharp. Faith forced a smile, hoping Wendy couldn't hear her racing heartbeats. I was just looking for my phone, she lied. Wendy stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, she smiled. Faith felt cold all over. She had barely escaped being caught. But now, she knew for sure. Wendy was hiding something. Faith couldn't ignore the feeling in her guts. Wendy was dangerous. The bag of teeth had been proof enough. But now, she needed answers. She needed to know who Wendy really was. She started digging into Wendy's past. At first, it was difficult. Wendy didn't talk much about her life before she met Kwame. She barely mentioned her family, her childhood, even old friends. It was as if she had erased their past completely. But Faith was determined. She began asking quiet questions around town, speaking to people who had known Wendy before she married Kwame. Some shrugged, saying Wendy was always polite but distant. Others hesitated, their face darkening, as if remembering something unpleasant. Then Faith met an old woman who had lived near Wendy years ago. The old woman sat outside a small shop, peeling oranges with slow, careful movements. When Faith asked about Wendy, the woman's hands stopped. "You should leave that woman alone," she said, her voice low. Faith's heart pounded. "Why?" The woman sighed, looking around as if checking for listening ears. Then she leaned in. "People around here disappear," she whispered. Faith's breath caught. "What do you mean?" The woman's eyes were tired, filled with old fear. Neighbors, co-workers, even family members, they go missing. No one finds their bodies. No one knows where they went. Faith felt a chill crawl up her spine. She pressed for more details, but the woman refused to say anything else. She simply shook her head and muttered, "Stay away from her." Faith left, her mind racing. She spent the next few days searching for records, old news articles, anything that could confirm what the woman had said. And what she found made her stomach twist. Years ago, Wendy had worked at a small restaurant. One of the co-workers had gone missing. The case was never solved. Before that, she had lived with an aunt. The aunt had vanished without a trace. Even further back, a childhood friend had disappeared. The pattern was clear. People around Wendy always seemed to vanish. Faith sat in a room, staring at the notes she had written. Was Wendy involved? And if so, where were the bodies? She thought about the bag of teeth. She thought about Sandra. She thought about the locked storage room Wendy never let anyone enter. A terrible thought crept into her mind. She needed to find out what was inside that room before it was too late. The news spread fast. Kwame had been arrested. Faith stood frozen in the living room, staring at the television screen. The reporter spoke in a serious tone, explaining that new evidence had surfaced in Sandra's disappearance. The police believed Kwame was involved. Faith's heart pounded. She knew her brother. He wasn't perfect, but he wasn't a killer. Yet, here he was, being led out of his shop in handcuffs, his face pale, his eyes wide with shock. Outside, people gathered, whispering among themselves. Some shook their heads, others pointed, their voices filled with judgment. Faith clenched their fists. This wasn't right. But Wendy played her part perfectly. She sat on the couch, her hands trembling, her eyes red from fake tears. She sobbed softly, telling anyone who would listen how much she loved her husband, how she couldn't believe this was happening. "I never knew he was capable of this," she whispered to the neighbors who had come to check on her. "I thought we were happy." They nodded sympathetically, offering words of comfort. But Faith watched closely. She saw the way Wendy wiped her tears too quickly, as if she wasn't really crying. She saw the way her lips twitched into a smile when no one was looking. Faith's stomach twisted. Wendy wasn't grieving. She was enjoying this. Faith knew her brother was innocent, and she knew exactly who was responsible. Wendy. But how could she prove it? She needed evidence. She needed to find out what Wendy was hiding, and she needed to do it fast, before Wendy decided to make her disappear too. Faith couldn't ignore the feelings in her guts. Wendy was hiding something. Ever since Kwame's arrest, Wendy had been acting strangely. She wasn't sad. She wasn't worried. Instead, she seemed calm. Too calm. She cooked meals, still smiled at the neighbors, still went about her day as if nothing had changed. But Faith knew better. She remembered something, the storage room. It was a small room at the back of the kitchen, always locked. Wendy never let anyone inside. Whenever Faith tried to enter, even to grab some vegetables, Wendy would block her path. "Just wait in the kitchen," Wendy would say, her voice sweet but firm. Faith had never questioned it before. But now, after everything she had learned, she knew she had to get inside. She waited until late at night. The house was silent. Wendy was asleep in her bedroom. Faith tiptoed through the dark hallway, her heart pounding. She reached the storage room door and tested the handle. Locked. She had expected that. She pulled a small hairpin from her pocket and began picking the lock, her fingers trembling. She had never done this before, but she had watched enough videos to know the basics. Click! The lock snapped open. Faith held her breath and pushed the door open slowly. At first, everything looked normal. Shelves lined the walls, filled with pots, bags of rice, dried fish, and vegetables. The air smelled of spices and old wood. Faith frowned. Had she been wrong? Then she saw it. The fridge. It sat at the back of the room, large and old, its surface scratched and worn. But what made Faith's stomach twist was the padlock keeping it shut. Why would Wendy lock a fridge? Faith stepped closer, her pulse racing. She reached for the padlock, gripping it tightly. She had to know. She had to see what was inside. Faith's hands trembled as she gripped the padlock. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought Wendy might hear it from her bedroom. She took a deep breath. It was a small padlock. She hit it with a small hammer lying nearby. Snap! The padlock broke open. She hesitated for a moment, fear creeping into her chest. But she had come this far. She had to know the truth. Slowly, she pulled the fridge door open. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just stacks of wrapped meats, frozen solid. But as she looked closer, her stomach twisted. Something was wrong. The meat wasn't shaped like normal cuts. It wasn't neatly packed like beef or chicken. Faith's breath caught in her throat. She reached out with shaking hands and peeled back one of the wrappings. A scream got stuck in her throat. Fingers, pale, stiff fingers. She stumbled back, her body shaking. She looked at the other packages, her mind refusing to believe what she was seeing. She ripped open another one, a feet, then a human arm, frozen solid, the skin slightly discolored. Faith gasped, covering her mouth. She looked deeper into the fridge, her vision blurring with shock. There were more. Flesh, bones, pieces of people. Her knees buckled. She knew who they belonged to. Sandra and possibly others. Faith's stomach twisted violently. She felt like she might throw up. She had suspected Wendy was dangerous, but this was worse than anything she had imagined. She had been eating from this fridge. Kwame had been eating from this fridge. Faith's body shook as she stumbled backward, her mind screaming at her to run. Then she heard a sound behind her. She turned and came face to face with Wendy. Faith's breath itched in her throat. She turned slowly, her body stiff with fear. Wendy stood in the doorway, gripping a machete. The dim light from the kitchen cast eerie shadows across her face, making her look almost unreal, like something out of a nightmare. Her expression was blank, emotionless, as if she felt nothing at all. Faith's heart pounded so hard, she thought it might burst. "You shouldn't have seen that," Wendy whispered. Her voice was calm, too calm. Faith's legs felt weak, but she forced herself to stand tall. She couldn't let Wendy see her fear. "What have you done?" Faith's voice was barely above a whisper. Wendy tilted her head slightly, her grip tightening on the machete. "I did what needed to be done," she said simply. Faith's stomach twisted. Sandra, the missing people, the bag of teeth, the fridge full of human meat. It was all Wendy. Faith took a slow step back, her mind racing. She needed to get out. She needed to run, but Wendy blocked the only exit. Faith's eyes darted around the storage room, searching for something, anything she could use to defend herself. Wendy took a step forward. "You have always been too curious," she murmured, "too nosy." Faith swallowed hard. "I should have taken care of you sooner." Faith's blood ran cold. Wendy was going to kill her. She had to act fast. Faith's fingers brushed against the heavy metal pots sitting on the shelf beside her. Wendy raised the machete. Faith grabbed the machete and swung. The metal slammed into Wendy's arm, knocking her back. The machete clattered to the floor. Faith didn't wait. She ran. She screamed. And behind her, Wendy was already getting back up. Faith's heart pounded as she scrambled to the door. Behind her, Wendy let out a low, unnerving chuckle. A sound that sent chills down Faith's spine. "You can't run," Wendy whispered. Faith didn't listen. She lunged forward, reaching for the door handle. But before she could pull it open, Wendy struck. The machete sliced into Faith's arm. A sharp burning pain exploded through her body. Blood splattered onto the floor, staining the wooden planks a deep red. Faith screamed, clutching her wounded arm. Wendy smiled, her eyes dark with something terrifying, something inhuman. Faith's vision blurred from the pain, but she refused to give up. She had to fight. Her eyes darted around the storage room, searching for anything she could use. Then she saw it, a broken chair leg, lying near the shelves. Wendy raised the machete again, ready to strike. Faith grabbed the chair leg and swung with all her strength. The wood slammed into Wendy's face, knocking her backward. Wendy stumbled, her grip on the machete loosening. Faith didn't waste a second. She crawled towards the door, her injured arm throbbing, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She screamed, hoping someone, anyone, would hear her. But Wendy was already recovering. Faith could hear her footsteps, slow and steady, moving closer. She had to get out. She had to survive. Faith's screams tore through the quiet night like a wounded animal. She didn't care who heard her. She just needed help. Her voice echoed through the house, spilling out into the streets. The neighbors, already restless from the rumors about Kwame's arrest, woke up. Lights flickered on. Doors creaked open. People rushed towards the house. Inside, Wendy lunged at Faith. Her face twisted with fury. "Shut up," she eased, grabbing Faith's shoulders. Faith kicked wildly, her injured arm throbbing, her body shaking with fear. Wendy pressed her hand over Faith's mouth, trying to silence her. But it was too late. The first person to arrive was an elderly woman from next door. She stepped into the kitchen, her eyes widening at the sight before her. Faith, bloody and struggling. Wendy, towering over her like a predator. Then others followed. A man from across the street. A group of young boys. More neighbors. They froze in the doorway, their eyes darting around the room. They saw the blood. They saw the machetes. Then someone noticed the fridge. A young boy, no older than 10, pointed at it. "Why is there a lock on the fridge?" he said, his voice small but sharp. The villagers looked closer. One of the men stepped forward, his face grim. He pulled the fridge door open, and then the horror spilled out. Gasp filled the room. A woman screamed. A man stumbled back, covering his mouth. Inside the fridge, fingers, limbs, flesh, pieces of people, frozen and packed like meat. The villagers turned to Wendy, their faces filled with shock and disgust. Wendy didn't move. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She simply smiled. Faith, still gasping for breath, pointed a shaking finger at her. "She did this," she whispered. "She killed them." The villagers closed in. Wendy had been caught. The house was in chaos. Neighbors whispered in shock, their voices trembling. Some stood frozen, staring at the open fridge, unable to believe what they were seeing. Others backed away, their faces pale with fear. Faith sat on the floor, her injured arm throbbing, her breath coming in short gasps. She had survived, but she wasn't safe yet. Then the sound of sirens pierced the night. The police had arrived. 2 officers stepped into the house, their faces hard and serious. They scanned the room, taking in the blood, the broken padlock, the terrified villagers. Then their eyes landed on Wendy. She stood in the middle of the kitchen, her hands still stained with Faith's blood, But she wasn't panicking. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even trying to run. She simply smiled. One of the officers stepped forward cautiously. "Wendy Mensah," he said firmly, "you are under arrest for murder." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. The villagers watched, waiting for Wendy to react. Would she scream? Would she beg? Would she deny everything? But Wendy did none of those things. She tilted her head, her eerie smile never fading. "I was wondering when you would come," she murmured. The officer frowned, clearly unsettled. He pulled out his handcuffs and stepped closer. "Turn around," he ordered. Wendy obeyed, moving slowly, gracefully, as if she had all the time in the world. The officer snapped the cuffs onto her wrists, locking them tight. Faith shivered. Even now, even as she was being taken away, Wendy didn't look afraid. She didn't fight. She didn't protest. She simply walked out of the house, her head held high, her smile still in place. As the officers led her towards the police car, she turned her head slightly, her gaze locking onto Faith. For a moment, everything else faded. The voices, the sirens, the whispers. It was just Wendy and Faith. Then Wendy spoke, her voice soft but chilling. "You saved yourself," she said, "but she will never forget me." Faith's blood ran cold. She watched as Wendy was placed into the police car, the door slamming shut behind her. The car pulled away, disappearing into the night. But Wendy's smile, that handsome knowing smile, stayed with Faith. And deep down, Faith knew Wendy was right. She would never forget her. The town was shaking. News of Wendy's arrest spread like wildfire. People whispered in the streets, their voice filled with shock and fear. Some refused to believe it. How could a woman so quiet, so polite, be capable of such horror? Others had always felt something was off about her, but no one had imagined this. The police wasted no time. Investigators dug deep into Wendy's past, determined to uncover the truth. What they found was terrifying. Wendy had been killing for years. She had moved from town to town, never staying in one place for too long. And wherever she went, people disappeared. Neighbors, co-workers, even distant relatives. Their bodies were never found. Until now. The fridge in Wendy's storage room had been a secret, a way of making sure no one ever found the remains. She had been feeding her victims to unsuspecting people, including Kwame. When Kwame learned the truth, he collapsed. He sat in the police station, his hands gripping his head, his body shaking. "She fed them to me," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Faith sat beside him, her injured arm wrapped in bandages. She didn't know what to say. Kwame's face was pale, his eyes empty. "I ate them," he murmured. "I ate them, and I didn't even know." The realization shattered him. He thought back to all the meals Wendy had cooked for him. The stews, the grilled meats, the soups. He had always praised their cooking, always told her how delicious it was. Now he felt sick. He had trusted her, loved her, and all along she had been feeding him the dead. Faith placed a hand on his shoulder, but he didn't react. He just sat there, staring at nothing, broken, and deep down, Faith knew it would never be the same again. Wendy's trial was all anyone could talk about. Reporters crowded outside the courthouse, their cameras flashing, their voices overlapping as they fought to capture every detail. The case had shocked the entire country. A woman who had been cooking and feeding her victims to unsuspecting people. People wanted answers. They wanted to understand why Wendy had done it. But Wendy, she felt nothing. She sat in the courtroom, her hands carved, her face calm. She didn't cry. She didn't look nervous. She didn't even blink when the prosecutor listed her crimes. Murder, deception, cannibalism. The families of the victims sat in the audience, their faces filled with grief and rage. Kwame was there too, but he looked hollow, like a man who had lost everything. Faith sat beside him, her hands clenched into fists. She wanted Wendy to suffer. She wanted her to feel fear, to feel guilt, but Wendy didn't. When the judge asked her to speak, she stood slowly, her movements graceful, controlled. The courtroom fell silent, waiting for her explanation. She smiled, and then she said, "They deserved it." Gasp filled the room. The judge frowned. "What do you mean by that?" Wendy tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question, but she didn't explain. She didn't say anything else. She simply sat back down, her eerie smile never fading. No one knew what she meant. No one understood why she had done it. And that made it even more terrifying. The trial was over. Wendy was gone, locked away in prison, far from the town she had terrorized. But even though she was no longer there, her presence still lingered. People whispered about her in the streets, in the markets, in hushed conversations behind closed doors. They called her the wife who fed him his mistress. Some spoke of her with disgust, others with fear. A few even admired her, though they would never say it out loud. But for Kwame and Faith, the nightmare was far from over. Kwame was released, but it was never the same. He returned to his small home, but it no longer felt like home. Every corner reminded him of Wendy, her laughter, her cooking, her lies. He couldn't eat meat anymore. Every time he saw a plate of food, his stomach twisted. He thought about the meals Wendy had prepared for him, the stews he had praised, the dishes he had enjoyed. Had he eaten Sandra? Had he eaten others? The thought made him sick. He barely spoke to anyone. He barely left the house. At night, he sat in the dark, staring at nothing, haunted by the truth. Faith tried to move on, but the nightmares wouldn't let her. She dreamed of the storage room, of the fridge, of the frozen fingers and feet. She dreamed of Wendy's smile, of the way she had whispered, "You will never forget me." And Wendy was right. Faith couldn't forget. She avoided the kitchen at night. She avoided dark rooms. She avoided thinking too much, because every time she did, she remembered Wendy's cold, calculating eyes. The town moved on, but the scars remained. People locked their doors earlier. They looked over their shoulders more often, and every now and then, someone would ask, why did Wendy do it? But no one had the answer. I hope you enjoyed this story. Now I want to hear from you. Did Kwame deserve to be fed human meat just because he cheated? What was the most shocking part of this story to you? Let me know down below. Thank you so much for watching. And if you've not subscribed yet, Abi, you know that. Subscribe and like this video. It is very important too. And don't forget to turn on the notifications so that when I post, you'll be notified immediately. See you next time. Okay, I'm done. Bye.